You're listening to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today's episode is the Family Identity Crisis: Building Your Own Family Culture versus Extending Theirs. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast is your sanctuary for navigating these sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws, while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered nearly 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Welcome to this week's podcast, and I want to ask you a question. Have you ever felt like your family really isn't your family? Like you're just an extension of your in-laws' dynasty instead of building something new with your husband? If you feel that way, you are definitely not alone. This episode is going to focus on the struggle that many of us as Catholic wives face when we're trying to establish our own family identity versus just kind of getting absorbed or extending the family that our in laws have. Now, the foundation of everything that we do as Catholic wives should, logically speaking, be our Catholic faith. So I'd like to share this catechism reference. It's number 2207, and it says, "The family is the original cell of social life. It is the natural society in which husband and wife are called to give themselves in love and in the gift of life. Authority, stability, and a life of relationships within the family constitute the foundations for freedom, security, and fraternity with society." And I want to point out that it does not include our in laws. Yes, of course, our in laws and our families of origin will definitely have an impact on the type of family culture that we create. But that shouldn't be the only thing we look at. We shouldn't just decide that we're going to do everything exactly like one family or the other. That's the beauty of starting our own families, is we get to come up with our own family culture, our own family sayings, our own family traditions, because we are a brand new family unit. The Catholic Church specifically recognizes each family unit as its own, quote, original cell. It's not just an extension of existing families. And we need to think about this authority within our family is meant to rest with us and with our husbands, not our extended family. So the people living with your last name under your roof who have exchanged marriage vows, that is the authority for your immediate family. The Catechism also affirms that the stability of our immediate family relationships creates the foundations for freedom. And I think that's not just physical freedom or the freedom that we think about as maybe people from the United States who think, yes, we are a nation founded on this pursuit of liberty. No, it is the freedom to be who we genuinely are, be who we are in Christ, a freedom to express that, a freedom to express and share our joys and disappointments without a fear of judgment. That's really what a healthy family should be. This teaching also supports the idea that a desire for our own family identity is aligned with what our church teaches. And I think it's fair to acknowledge that there is just a natural tension that comes when you are trying to establish your own family unit while also trying to balance maintaining a respectful relationship with your extended family. I think it's natural as parents to kind of hope and have some desires that our children will take some of the traditions and some of the things that we do with them into the next generation. You know, if we do Christmas a certain way, I think we all kind of hope that that's something that our children would cherish and want to do with their children. But as parents, we should be wise enough, we should be mature enough to realize that, yes, these are our children, but now they are grown. Now they are autonomous with their own family, and they can make those decisions to do exactly what we did or turn and do something completely different. So What is a family identity? Well, your family's identity is like your family's unique fingerprint. No two families should be exactly alike. Yes, there will be some similarities, just like we have similarities within our fingerprints. There's three different types of fingerprints, but nobody's is exactly like anybody else's. Even twins have different fingerprints. Now, this family identity includes our family values, how we practice our Catholic faith, our traditions, how we communicate, or maybe how we don't communicate with each other, and how we come about making decisions, how we do vacations, how we celebrate birthdays. Do we do a lot of gifts or do we not do any gifts? All those things are part of our family's identity. So, here are some other examples outside of the ones I already gave you. How we handle Sunday rituals. Do we go to Mass? Do the children participate in religious education? Do we pray a rosary before Mass? Maybe the prayers that we say together throughout the week. That's part of our family identity. Even little things like nicknames or inside jokes or little stories that the family remembers from year to year and you tell them and everybody knows, but an outsider comes in and they don't quite get it. That's part of your family identity. There is a difference between thoughtfully incorporating elements from both yours and your husband's background versus defaulting to one family's way of doing everything. Probably one of the best decisions we ever made for our marriage wasn't really a decision that we got to make at all. And that was to move all the way to the middle of the country, far away from our East Coast families, to begin our married life. The decision was made for us because my husband was in the Air Force at the time, and that's where we were stationed. And that really was an amazing decision because that gave us a chance to decide just basic things like what time do we eat dinner? We're not going to default to how his parents did it or my parents did it. How are we going to decorate the house? How are we going to celebrate the little holidays that don't usually involve big family gatherings like Valentine's Day or Halloween or St. Patrick's Day or the 4th of July? It was a great opportunity for us to have that distance so that we could almost be forced to make those decisions on our own. Now, there are some signs that your family might be lacking its own identity. And some of those signs include constantly checking in with your in laws before making any decisions, or feeling anxious or stressed out and overwhelmed about starting a new family tradition. Or what about your children assuming that their grandparents' authority equals or even comes before your authority? I think a lot of us have seen families where that's the case, where maybe the grandparents have either through necessity or just circumstantial or maybe intentionally taken a role that leaves the kids kind of questioning as to who's the boss here? Who do I need to look to if I want my question or my needs addressed? So sometimes, if we have not established our own family identity, we can have this kind of a strange feeling like you're homesick for a family identity that has not been created yet. It might feel like this longing to break away from the traditions, from the normal activities that your in laws do, and just kind of doing things the way you want to do it. And there is a strange homesick kind of feeling that comes with that because you're living almost like in somebody else's town, but it's your town. And I don't know if you've ever been homesick before. I left college and I went to a school 13 hours away from my home. And I did have that homesick feeling, just longing for something that I was familiar with. And something similar can happen if you are in a family where your traditions, the way you do things, your family culture is just like a copy of what your in laws do. Now, there's a really strong possibility that other Catholic families that you admire, you might admire them partly because they have their own distinct identity. They didn't just copy and paste from their families of origin. So now that we've established what your family identity is, how does it happen? How does this crisis come about? Well, your husband has had decades of this is how a family works programming programmed into his brain. And he likely can't even see that there's a problem. He likely has been trained that this is the way families should do things. And I have very little doubt that when my husband and his brother were growing up, there were conversations about how other families did things and how the way my husband's family and their extended family did it was the right way of doing things because I heard conversations like that all the time. And so that could be the situation. It could be that your husband from childhood has heard that this way of doing Christmas, that this way of making deviled eggs, this way of hosting Easter is the only way to do it. Now, there is a huge issue, and that is the power of familiarity. We as humans, we will naturally gravitate toward what we know, even when we're creating something new. So if we are trying to create a new tradition, it is so easy to just default to the way we're used to. And that could very well be the case if your family is struggling with its own identity. We are probably both equally guilty of this, both us and our husbands, but we may be unconsciously trying to recreate our childhood environment because it just feels right. Now, the problem with it is if one of us or both of us were raised in a family that was not emotionally, spiritually, mentally healthy, what feels right might actually be not so good. Also, we as women can fall into the doormat daughter in law trap, right? Where we are trying to be the good Catholic daughter in law, and we have this false belief that when we submit to our in law's preferences, it makes us more virtuous. It makes us more meek and humble when really that's not exactly what it is. It's just kind of falling into some maybe not so healthy patterns and us not standing up and asserting that, I really don't like sweet pickle relish in deviled eggs. And it is okay that you do, but it's also okay that I don't. That doesn't make you a bad daughter in law if you don't like sweet pickle relish in your deviled eggs. I don't like sweet pickle relish in my deviled eggs, in case you can't tell. I don't like it in chicken salad either. But that doesn't make me a bad daughter in law because my mother in law puts that in there. It's just a difference of opinion. And so we have to be cautious and we have to be aware of those things when we actually have an opinion on something and we just kind of default to what our in laws are talking about or the way they want to do things just because we don't want to stir the pot. We don't want to speak up for ourselves when really neither one is right or wrong. It's just a difference of opinion. Women will often feel guilty for wanting to establish some different traditions or some different boundaries. I don't know what it is, I don't know why, but throughout our childhood, we are often trained to be nice. We're trained to just smile and look pretty. We're trained to not rock the boat. Something just came up today, and I can't remember the context of the conversation, but it had to do with the fact that so many women, even still, are raised to just be nice, just be quiet, just be polite when they really have a different opinion. And we're taught that by having a different opinion that that's not nice, that that's not acceptable. And so we feel guilty if we want to change things up when really, like I said, it's not right or wrong to put sweet pickle relish in your deviled eggs. Yes, I'm going to use this example over and over again because it's such a simple one and it is so silly to think about. But when it comes to other things, the decision is basically very much the same. There's no right or wrong way to hang stockings for Christmas. There's no right or wrong way to baste or not baste a turkey. It's just different family preferences. And we don't have to feel guilty or feel bad for wanting to do something different or to set up boundaries if nobody else has done it before. One of the things about this crisis, as I'm calling it, of a family identity is it's almost an invisible process that happens. It's very, very gradual. It never happens all at once, but it comes about through a series of small defaults over time. Yeah, it's just easier to go along with what your in laws want to do for Easter because maybe you don't have any real strong preference, so might as well just do it that way. And the same thing goes with any other tradition, any other thing that your family does, is sometimes it is easier to just go with the flow if you don't have a strong opinion about it. But then the next thing you know, years have gone by and you look at your family and you think, we are exact copies of what my in laws have done. We're not our own family. We don't have our own family culture. It's just theirs in our family. Hi, Miriam Susan here. I wanted to point out a new feature for you to reach out with any questions that you might have. It is an audio message submission option on my website, desiringpeace.com/podcast. If you have any questions, if you just want to reach out, if you just want to tell me, hey, thank you, I really appreciated this episode, I would absolutely love to hear from you. If you decide to submit a question, it could be chosen to be played here on the podcast or for me to just answer it if it makes more sense for me to just address your question without playing your audio. But I will be in touch if you reach out. Just send me a quick note. Go to desiringpeace.com/podcast. Submit your audio message now. Many in laws will often resist our family's autonomy. Their identity might be too wrapped up in their role as parent or them still seeing you and your husband as their extensions. When that happens, there will be some resistance if you try to change things up. That's not necessarily healthy, but it's not necessarily uncommon either. And even the healthiest of parents can feel some kind of resistance when they see their adult children doing things a little bit differently than they did. Kind of like what seems like a controversial choice to homeschool children versus send them to school. Now, that was a very big deal in my family. My children were quizzed often about whether they could read, whether they could count, do basic things. Did they know their colors? Did they know their shapes? All these kinds of things. And I don't think it was necessarily malicious, but it was different. And my parents did not even consider homeschooling. It wasn't even a thing for them to think about in the early 80s. And so to have something different come along, yeah, they're going to be a little resistant to it because it's not something familiar. They were concerned about the socialization of the children. They were concerned about whether they would actually learn what they needed to learn. And so I did experience some resistance, but over time, they accepted the fact. And now my mom is very glad that our kids are homeschooled because of all the craziness that is going on in society, and she is grateful for our choice. Now, if your family is the opposite way, maybe you were homeschooled and you have decided that you are going to put your kids in public or private school. There's going to be some resistance because that's what your parents were used to doing. That's the decision that they made. They thought that that was the best decision for their family at that time. And then you coming along and choosing a different decision, there's going to be some natural resistance that comes. But the issue that comes with that is when that resistance is because there is an enmeshed family relationship and the identity of your in laws or the identity of your parents might be too wrapped up in you being their little girl, him being their little boy, and bucking whatever they did and them not liking it. And this can be especially challenging. All of these things, these crises, can be especially challenging during major life transitions. What are those transitions? Marriage, having your first child, maybe having your sixth or seventh child. There's a lot of resistance that comes sometimes with parents who maybe only had one or two children, and all of a sudden you're on baby number six. That's a lot of resistance that can come in there if they don't view children in the same way that you do. Moving, moving to a different place, moving to a different country, a lot of resistance can come there. And then, of course, holidays. The unseen competition between, well, that's the way we've always done it versus the way we want to do it can get kind of intense at times. And how we deal with that is very individual to us and our individual families. But what is the impact? What happens when you don't have a unique family identity? What happens when you just start doing everything that your in laws do and you're not happy and the kids don't know any different? Well, what happens? Well, oftentimes you will start to build up this quiet resentment because you're living somebody else's family story instead of writing your own. It can often affect your emotional connection to your husband because you feel like his parents' preferences come first, come before you. And he chose you. And so why is he choosing what his parents want to do over what you want to do? This can also really drain your mental energy. Constantly navigating somebody else's expectations rather than feeling at home in your own family system, that is exhausting. If you feel like you're just a cog in the wheel, a gear in the system, and you just got to go with what everybody's doing, you don't have a say, well, that's fine if you are a gear or if you are a cog, but you're not. You're an individual with different desires, different wants, different hopes, different preferences. And so that can be really, really draining. Now, what about the impact on our children? Well, they might have some confusion over who makes the rules and whose family they belong to. The children will see and sense and feel the hierarchy. If grandma doesn't get the final say, they notice. They notice how you react. They notice how your husband responds to that. They notice how everybody else might cater to grandma if she throws a tantrum when she doesn't get her way. Then there's also spiritual consequences of how when we live an inauthentic life, that leads to this inner tension of feeling that we're stuck, that we're blocked, that we can't be who we genuinely are. And it blocks genuine, true peace in our lives. Now, why does all of this matter for our marriage long term? Well, the health of our marriage thrives when we develop our own identity because it's choices that we have been able to make of our own volition. It's not because that's the way it's always done, it's because we've talked about it. Or maybe we just did something spontaneous once and we decided that's going to be part of our family tradition. Those are things that make an amazing family identity. Our own little things that we do, our own little sayings that we say. That's what makes us a unique family unit. Now, this can become a very subtle but powerful wedge that can be driven between you and your husband if you don't have your own unique family identity. And your husband may not have any idea why you're upset about these little things. And it's like my episode that I did about the 1,000 paper cuts, how it's not just one little thing that you get upset about, it's the building over time. And our family was talking about this concept of the 1,000 paper cuts, death by 1,000 paper cuts, and how, a paper cut can be barely visible, hardly noticeable to most people, and even to you until you wash your hands, until you pick up a pickle, until you pick up a lemon, and all of a sudden it burns and it hurts so bad. And you think, well, that's just a tiny paper cut. Why does it matter? And oftentimes I will hear that in my family. It's just a paper cut, no big deal. Well, it is a big deal because when we get paper cuts on our hands have so many nerve endings that the pain does feel more intense than perhaps if we got a scratch on our upper arm that doesn't have as many nerve endings. So Our husbands are not going to understand why we get upset about little things like, so we eat Easter lunch at dinner time. Maybe we, instead of eating it at noon, we eat it at 6 o'clock. That's not a big deal. Well, if that's because that's what his family has always done, it does seem like a little thing, but it's just one little paper cut on top of all the other paper cuts. The hidden impact of this lack of a family culture can also make you feel like you are a perpetual outsider in your own family rather than a co creator of what that family is all about. And the exhaustion of constantly accommodating what somebody else wants, it's almost too much to bear at times versus living an authentic life the way you want to live it with your husband, making your decisions and making choices for yourselves. Now, if you're going through this, if you are nodding your head at a lot of these things and realizing that, yes, the things that my family does, they're just a copy and paste of what my in laws do, you're going to have some feelings. And chances are you may be suppressing them, maybe you're ignoring them, or maybe you are acknowledging these feelings. It might be that knot that you get in your stomach when your family plans always revolve around your in law's preferences. It's not overthinking, it's your intuition speaking to you. You might feel guilty or selfish for wanting your own family culture, but those feelings are based on misconceptions. They're based on this idea that you can't have your own preferences, that you can't have your own identity, that you can't have your own decisions that you make with you and your husband. It is 100% appropriate for you and your husband to make your own decisions about the things that your family does. There may also be a confusing mix of love for your in laws right next to and alongside frustration with the dynamics. You can be grateful and appreciate the many things that your in laws have done, but also be frustrated that it seems like they hold those things against you if you decide to do something different. Feeling invisible, feeling unimportant in family decision making is actually extremely significant. It is not petty. If you feel like you can't make your own decisions in your marriage and your family, that is a big deal. You should not be an invisible third wheel between your husband and his parents. No, you and your husband should be making decisions. If they align with what your in laws agree with, great. But if not, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If you have these feelings of just frustration, disappointment, discomfort when it comes to not having your own family identity, I would say that they're actually aligned with how God designed your family to be and for your marriage to be, not opposing it. If your in laws, one of their favorite tools is spiritual abuse, then you better believe that they're going to say, well, it's, God's will that we should listen to our elders and, whatever kinds of lies they want to throw out there to try to manipulate you and control you and your husband to make decisions that they want you to make. But if you do feel this kind of inner angst, it's because maybe perhaps you're not living authentically. You are not creating your own family identity and marriage the way that God wants you to. He wants you to be unique. He wants you to be yourselves in your own separate unit. He doesn't need any copies of anybody else's relationship in yours. And a lot of times when we are going through this, we feel very isolated. We feel very lonely because oftentimes we are the only ones that see the problem. If your husband has siblings, they might fall right in line and they might do exactly what your in laws want. Their families might be copies and paste version of your in laws. And so it can be very, very lonely if you're the only one that sees this and the only one that feels that way. And you might even be afraid to bring this up with your husband because you know you're the only one that seems to have a problem with it. But I hope that you can understand that there should be a sense of relief that comes from just simply recognizing this pattern of defaulting to whatever your in laws want and recognizing it for what it is. It can be a pattern that your husband is used to being in and just wants to not rock the boat, wants to keep the peace, although it's false peace. And that kind of peace really only gives peace to the people you're trying to appease. It leaves you swirling in chaos because it's not authentic. It's not authentic peace. If you can't speak up, if you can't have your own family identity, then yes, there is going to be just this sense of turmoil and this sense of even sadness and mourning for not having your own family identity. And so when you get to that point, when you realize what is actually going on, you feel less crazy. When I finally started having names and words for the patterns that I was seeing with my in laws and was able to actually sit down and write out what those patterns were, it was incredibly freeing because I knew that I wasn't crazy. I knew I wasn't imagining these things. I was able to go back and look through years and years of things happening where the decisions were just defaulted to what my in-laws wanted and realize, okay, this is a pattern. This is just something that my husband does because it's easier. It's easier to just go along and suck it up. And I think he was trained from a very young age to not really have a lot of strong preferences because when he had a strong decision, it was just kind of taken out of him. We were talking this week about different parenting styles with our kids, and he was saying how he felt like the way he was raised was the objective was to break his will. And that is absolutely not how we have raised our children. We didn't ever think that it was our job to break the will of our children. We did things very differently. And so for me to realize that my husband was just in this pattern of trying to do things to just please his parents, to default to what they wanted because it was just easier, because he had that type of upbringing where it was let's break his will, he developed this pattern of not really having strong preferences for a lot of things. And it takes time, if your husband has been raised in that way, to give him the space to figure out what he really does like. I've heard stories of women who were in abusive relationships their entire lives, and whatever it was, they just defaulted to whatever the guy that she was dating with liked. And I think there's actually a movie about this. I think it's called The Runaway Bride with Julia Roberts in it. And she goes through this realization that anytime she was dating a guy, the way she liked her eggs was the way he liked to cook his eggs and eat his eggs. And I think that's very much the case for a lot of our husbands who are raised in toxic and abusive homes is they just know that it's a whole lot easier to say, "Yeah, I'll just have scrambled eggs because that's what mom is cooking," versus saying, "You know what? I'd like to have one that's sunny side up," or "I'd like to have a soft boiled egg." And that little thing was just not allowed because that's not what mom was going to do. We all do these kinds of things at times because it's just easier. Sometimes it is easier to just make scrambled eggs for everybody and not be like a short order cook and having to cook scrambled eggs and fried eggs and soft boiled eggs and hard boiled eggs for everybody in the family. I mean, that's just not practical to do on a regular basis. But that doesn't mean that that has to be your preference, that you can only like scrambled eggs because that's what your family liked. Or, back to my example, deviled eggs with sweet pickle relish. It's okay to have a different preference. And for your family culture, for your own family identity, we have to help our husbands realize that it is okay, it's not wrong to have a different opinion on how to do things. And until we do have that separate identity from both of our families of origins, we're not really going to be our own individual family unit. We're not going to be that original cell of social life that the Catechism talks about. So, lots of food for thought for today. Remember, wanting your own family identity is normal and it is healthy. This is a tension that has existed between in laws and their adult children forever, since biblical times. So, we can go forward knowing that this is something that's been going on forever. How can we make it work within our family? I hope this has been an encouragement to you to definitely seek out ways that you can assert your autonomy as your own family unit. Find your own traditions, especially with Easter coming up. Do something a little bit different than the way you've always done it, if that's what you want to do. Talk it over with your husband. Talk about how you want to do things that is just special for your own family. Create new family memories by doing something a little bit different. And I think hopefully you'll find that your husband is open to these ideas, especially if you come to him with genuine kindness and not an attack of, I hate doing things the way your family does it. We have to do things differently. Obviously, it's going to be received very differently than if you approach your husband and say, hey, I thought it would be fun if we tried something different this year for Easter. What do you think about doing X, Y, and Z? And see how it goes. I pray that you can find ways to have your own family identity and create your own unique family culture, because that's what our kids will take with them into their marriages. And they will pick and choose from what they liked and what they didn't like from their childhood and pass it on to their children. God bless you. Go in peace. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you've ever wondered just how toxic your relationship with your in-laws really is, I've got the perfect tool for you. Introducing the new free Toxic In-Laws Assessment, a self-graded quiz designed to help you identify the true level of toxicity in your relationship with your in-laws. Whether you're unsure if your in-laws are really that bad or you think they might be worse than you realize, this assessment will give you the clarity you need. Don't leave it to guesswork. Take the free Toxic In-Laws Assessment now and start your journey towards healthier and more peaceful family dynamics. Visit desiringpeace.com/quiz to get started. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.